Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is something that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, but as the title implies, I kind of have no idea what I'm doing. So I've been kind of nervous and putting it off for a very long time to do so. Because I have a passion for movies and TV shows and games, I just wanted to have a discussion about them. I did a podcast with my good friend Will quite a while ago, but we had to stop that because life just got in the way. But I wanted to carry on the discussions with myself. Hi. So, what better way to start with the start of a universe? This is my uneducated opinion on Iron Man. So I watched this movie the other day, and the first thing that caught my attention was that, like, the Paramount logo. I think a lot of people forget about that, but Marvel had a massive history just before the whole universe expanded, and they always weren't this giant corporation that pretty much owned everything, and the entire movie business is essentially trying to copy and base itself off of. But way back when, Marvel was under a lot of pressure because they were effectively bankrupt. They were selling off their IPs from Spider-Man, from X-Men, Blade, Daredevil. All of this stuff was in the void that they couldn't use anymore because they needed to stay alive. And in the midst of their near bankruptcy, they decided to make a huge gamble. Mr. Sunday Movies, who is a really good YouTuber, actually made a really good video about this whole gamble and goes into a little bit more detail than I will right now. But I think essentially what it was is they had all these characters that was in the void, and they had to sort of rely on making a lot of their characters into movies from their B-list. Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, and all these other characters weren't well known. They weren't the go-to comics unless you were a die-hard fan of them. And they ended up making a deal where they acquired 500 million and had to make a certain amount of movies to then earn that back, or else they would lose everything. They would lose all of their intellectual property rights, which is kind of insane to think that Marvel was essentially a huge flop away from not existing anymore. So Jon Favreau and all the creative team behind making this deserves huge credit for actually putting it together in the first place and making it work because of all the stress behind Marvel and the fact that it just shouldn't have worked in the first place. Apparently there was a lot of instances in which they were actually writing the scenes on the day of filming. A lot of the cast had to actually improv the scenes that they were producing together. It does unfortunately give off that little bit of a quippy nature, which I don't think is this movie's problem, because it was the first one really to do it, with Robert Downey Jr. Being the central focus of that. He was the main cast and he was incredible at giving those improv performances. It's just more in a sense of most Marvel movies and I guess other big blockbuster Hollywood productions, every single main protagonist has to be the quippy natured one, or I guess in a lot of other cases every single character seems to be just one note quippy, always have to make a joke, and hardy ha, here's a comedy. And it's unfortunate that this movie is the start of the snowball going down the hill in which every movie is trying to replicate its success. And Jon Favreau, like I'm assuming a lot of other directors, mentioned that he had no idea whether this was going to be a success or not. And there's a few moments in the movie where you can definitely see that if the actors were not on point or the improv didn't work initially, this movie could have been a complete disaster. One scene that comes to mind is when Tony is just finished off testing out his flying capabilities, where he says,
"Yeah, I can fly."
that should not really have worked. Jon Favreau also describes Marvel being a new and up-and-coming studio, very independent, and being very free to express yourself and do what you want and make your vision of what you want the movie to be completely unique, which is a very stark contrast to nowadays, where you just have more so like directors for hire. You hire them to make the movies you want and not necessarily have a unique take on a certain movie. They also managed to get in a lot of comic book writers and artists to give their opinions on what the characters should be specifically. Like, I'm pretty sure they got Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Millar commissioned to give their input because of their knowledge of the characters themselves. Like, I don't think there should be a one-to-one of any character when you're translating it from a comic book or a normal novel into a movie or TV show. Like, I think every interpretation should be different and its own take, as long as the characters have their core principles intact. As I mentioned already, the casting of Tony Stark and it being Robert Downey Jr., it's hard to think of Iron Man never being him. There was reports when they were trying to make an Iron Man movie earlier on where it was going to be Tom Cruise, and more recent days when I think they were making Multiverse of Madness, there was reports that Tom Cruise was going to be Iron Man in that as just this alternate universe sort of take on it. And many other people didn't agree with the idea of Robert Downey Jr. being in the movie given his background. And it kind of makes you think that if Disney were to have made Iron Man today, would they have made it a little bit more freeing in who they cast and not? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Also in the behind the scenes, Sean Toob, the actor who played Yinsen, I've definitely butchered your name, but you are incredible in this movie. You're great. He describes seeing Robert Downey Jr. in the suit for the first time as he is going to be Iron Man forever. That's a bit of an understatement in hindsight. There's not been another actor that has played Iron Man. And yes, you've had other characters who have been portrayed by a certain actor, Michael Keaton. I'm sure everyone would say that he is Batman, or Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield being their own Spider-Man. They are that character forever. It's on another when you see an actor like Robert Downey Jr. or, in cases, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine for that extended period of time. Now, there's a little bit of the behind the scenes out of the way. I just wanted to make sure that people understood the scope of what was going on behind the scenes. So, the story of Iron Man, the billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, weapons expert, designer, and distributor, Tony Stark, gets blown up and he needs to make an Iron Man suit to save the world, essentially. That's very basic stuff. It starts with Tony living his extravagant lifestyle, not really giving a shit about it, people around him, or I guess more of a lack of awareness of the people around him. I really like how they've depicted him as straight up, he's not a good person. He's a piece of shit. He's an asshole. But the way they progress the movie, he keeps a lot of those character traits of him being very hyper-focused and not trying to be distracted by the people around him, not really caring about like what the board of directors are doing next week. Like, we're focusing now, I'm fixing this car, like the plane can wait for me. Because of the hero's journey that Tony Stark actually goes through, Robert Downey Jr.'s performance and his charisma makes him a much more lovable asshole, which is why I think loads of people fell in love with him anyway. One of my favourite moments early on in the movie is the moment when Tony Stark is trying to make his escape, but first he makes the arc reactor in his chest to save his life so he's not lugging about a car battery all day. And it's revealed not as this grand, over-the-top reveal of the camera moving into the chest and being overly dramatic. It's taken from the perspective of the terrorist looking in on the security cameras. I think that's a really, really awesome touch. I do find it quite funny that there are certain moments in the movie that the guys looking on certainly should be able to tell that they are not building the Jericho missile. Yeah, there's the odd moments when they're like, oh, this is backwards. No, this is not working. But they clearly see Tony Stark working on like the leg part of the Iron Man suit. You should probably shoot him down right there. This movie, I feel as though a lot more than not certainly balances the comedy a lot better. There's a lot of moments when, again, Tony Stark is very hyper-focused on the task at hand, and he knows the dangers of not being able to do this and quickly and efficiently. There's the odd comedy moment when I find it really hilarious how Tony Stark finally asks for Yinsen's name when he is in the middle of doing his one-shot only thing, or else the arc reactor's not going to work. Another way that this movie makes it very unique and have its own sort of vision that I feel is the surgery scene near the start of the movie. And it gives that quite horror-esque look of it, and it looks very displeasant. And it's very erratic in the way Tony moves his arms and his quick cut in. And it's hard to think of another moment within the MCU where it has a more focused and unique take on a horror aspect. I mean, there are moments in Multiverse of Madness, which is what you expect when you hire Sam Raimi to direct one of your movies. I'm actually incredibly shocked of the amount of practical effects that they used within this movie, from making the full suits of the Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 3 to having them make specialized wire work so that Robert Downey Jr. looks as though he's really flying in the workspace and he's able to control the direction where he's going, to also this surgical scene in which Pepper's trying to replace the arc reactor in Tony's chest. I genuinely thought that you would have seen like the generic Oh, behind the scenes look of maybe Robert Downey Jr. wearing a mocap suit, maybe the top half of the Iron Man suit. I feel as though practical uses make the movie feel much more real than a lot of the CGI uses. Not saying that the CGI is terrible and every movie should be going from practical onwards. You need to use CGI in order to make things actually look more fluid and efficient, as long as it doesn't look too terrible and not the overuse of it. I think you can see Tom Holland wearing a full Spider-Man suit, but they decide to replace it completely with CGI in the main movie, and it doesn't make it that more authentic, and it doesn't have that real suit-fitting feel to it. There are only like maybe a couple moments where I've noticed that the CGI wasn't totally there, where I think the moment where Tony was trying to take the suit off, you can kind of tell it's a little bit off, but you can forgive it for being a little bit of an older movie, even though it does hold up quite a bit. There's also a little moment where I think Tony Stark takes the gauntlet off and he tries to use his hand. It looks a little bit off, but again, the overall CGI I feel as though is absolutely incredible in this movie. That's where I think the CGI completely worked and I thought was completely faultless, was when they showed the intricacies of how to put on the suit onto Tony Stark in his first suit at a moment. I thought was fantastic, seeing all like the screws go in and the parts getting put onto his body. I feel as though superhero movies today should embrace the suit up scenes a lot more rather than just rely on, I think now it's just on nanotech shit. I think it makes sense for certain characters to use nanotech because that's within their backstory and stuff, because I kind of miss the authenticity about it. You even have Doctor Strange in throwing on his cape in Multiverse of Madness. That was a really refreshing take on it. I feel as though that goes into the conversation how a lot of VFX and concept designers are overworked and underpaid within the studios because they seem to just want instant results and they want them to make a bunch of different concept designs because they are unhappy with them all, only for them to just like go back and choose the first one. So they are limited on time on what they want it to look like, so they don't really have the opportunity to make a massive suit up scene anymore. Maybe don't crunch and give people time to make the best thing that they can and make it unique. I don't know. Again, I'm uneducated. I don't know shit about this. Another huge part of this movie, which I think is kind of unspoken about, is the score. Is fucking incredible. You know, everyone goes on about like the AC/DC and more like metal music that Tony listens to, especially in Iron Man 2 and Avengers. I feel as though the score goes with this movie so perfectly. Even when they are making the Iron Man suit in the caves, it goes so well with the hammering down and molding of the suit, and it that scene when he places it down in front of Yinsen, perfection.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
It might be part of the joke, but the moment when Agent Coulson refers to them as Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement Logistics Division, I wonder how many takes that took him to say Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement as Strategic Homeland as Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement Oh my god, you can't say it. It makes you wonder, were you really working on it? Or are you trying your absolute fucking hardest to try and make it spell out the word shield instead? I'd call bullshit, but again, might be part of the joke. I also really like the line that Tony says in the press meeting where he has become part of a system with zero accountability. Yeah, if only more leaders and people in governments and stuff actually took accountability for their actions and, I don't know, made people happier. I really do love it when they keep a lot of Tony's personal traits and characteristics the same when he comes back and he tells Stain that he wants to look back into arc reactor technology, but then just sort of leaves them to it, and he doesn't even give them a blueprint on how he did it in the first place, but because he just goes on and focuses on what he wants to do and builds the Iron Man suit and becomes a hero himself, because massive ego, I guess. And again, that goes into one of the main things about Tony, which makes him such a good character and so interesting, is that his ego and pride is so hyper-focused on what he wants to deal with, and he will strive to hit his goals no matter the consequences, because the dude should have died many fucking times in this movie. The amount of times that he doesn't really think about the consequences of his actions and he just ends up thinking, oh, fix that later. It's an afterthought. I didn't really think about that in the first place. And that is a thing that happens when you rewatch a lot of the MCU. There's Tony making something, it comes into a problem or a mistake or someone's injured, and he fixes that in a next movie, even if it's the smaller details. For example, Iron Man 3, he's really cold in his suit when he goes into a different country, and in the next movie, Homecoming, he builds in a heater. I'm not saying that this movie is like, oh, it's unrealistic how Iron Man can fall from like 20 billion feet in the air and then just completely survive. And actually, yeah, you can suspend your disbelief, but I like how they even make it part of the themes of Tony's character, where he seems to be on borrowed time and he should have died in the cave, and he's going to do anything in his power so that he can improve and help others. The sound design and effects of the movie is also on another level. I loved the introduction of Iron Man when he comes down and he starts fighting all the terrorists. Then you have those repulsors come out for the first time, and it's got that like thunderous lightning sound to it, which I feel as though they kind of lose in the later movies. But hearing it for the first time, it always gives that massive impact. And I think I even remember the shot when he comes down and he lands for the first time. It's so iconic, the signature superhero landing, and he just starts to murder everyone on sight. I even remember a lot of times when I used to play the old PlayStation 2, 3 Iron Man games, and I used to try and replicate those exact moments when I'd come down in front of someone and start blasting them away. Even in the most recent Avengers game. Going into the other characters, I really think the cast is fantastic when you have Gwyneth as Pepper Potts, you have Sean as Yinsen. I really do like Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane, because I really love his portrayal of giving this sort of father figure, parental mentorship to Tony Stark at the beginning. You really feel that. But then I really love his tension building and his sinister side when it comes to the point where the big reveal is that he is the one that calls the hit on Tony Stark to be killed. It might be the case of I like Jeff Bridges more than I like the character Obadiah Stane himself, because all it sort of resorts to is just he wants the power and wants the company and money, and yes. But Jeff Bridges is great. I think it's a shame the movie resorts to the typical bad guy is essentially the good guy, but with slightly better, bigger things. Kind of lets the movie down. But again, it's the first of the universe, so I think it can be sort of forgiven. Not in the later ones, though. Plus, of course, the blue beam into the sky. Gotta have that classic in these movies, you know. That actually reminds me, in the behind-the-scenes footage, the Ironmonger suit is actually referred to as Crimson Dynamo, if you didn't know, is one of the main villains that comes up against Tony Stark in the comics. It was referenced by that by Shane Patrick Mahan, the physical suit effects supervisor. So I wonder if there was a little bit of a miscommunication in who the big bad was going to be, or if that was the original purpose of Crimson Dynamo being the main villain. Speaking of other villains, the Mandarin was the other villain that was supposed to be in this movie alongside Ironmonger, which, in hindsight, thank God that they didn't, because it would have been that classic take of having a bunch of villains together, loads of them being underdeveloped and not interesting, and it would have been a bit strange trying to know how they would have portrayed the Mandarin back then. And glad they ended up just resorting to the terrorists being a part of the organization of the Ten Rings and referencing the Mandarin that way. One thing that I really liked the final battle is it wasn't just the typical, oh, we gotta stop the big bad guy before he destroys us with badness. Is Tony Stark again is on the theme of borrowed time, and he has got limited resources and power, and he has to use his genius in order to stop the bad guy. It wasn't just punchy punch until one punches one harder. Another character I really liked is Terrence Howard's Rhodey. I really liked how he gave off this no bullshit attitude, leader, military personnel. And it's a bit ironic that he says,
Next time, baby.
when he doesn't actually return for the next one, even though he got paid the most on this movie, reportedly, but then demanded more the next time. Because I think it was reported that Robert Downey Jr.'s wage actually increased dramatically in the sequel compared to Terrence Howard, so that's why they had to let him go. I mean, we ended up getting Don Cheadle as Rhodey. I think the ending of this movie has got to be one of the most iconic in all superhero genres, because a lot of those superheroes have to rely on their secret identity, but it completely blows out of the park when it ends on the moment of Tony Stark giving his identity away. Like I'm sure a lot of people, I didn't stay for the post-credit scenes when this movie first came out. I can't remember when I saw it for the first time, but I certainly do remember thinking, who the fuck's this Nick Fury guy? And was he talking about the Avengers? What's all that? What's all this?
What's all this? What's all this?
It was certainly not the first movie to ever do a post-credit scene, but it was one that definitely made it a staple that every movie nowadays has to have one. But after reading up a lot about what the Avengers are and what the plans were for the future of this universe, it was very, very exciting to see what the potential could be. We didn't know it was going to be this big, though. So the movie had the budget of approximately $140 million, which is fairly weird considering I think back then that is still a hefty budget for a movie to have compared to others. And there's moments where I think Kevin Feige even says we finished shooting on time and under budget. So it could have been less than that, it should have been more maybe. And with all the stress of the potential of what could happen to Marvel, it ended up making nearly 600 million, so it was a complete success, and Marvel didn't have to redistribute any more of their properties, and they were saved, and the rest is history. Like I said during the middle of this video, the shame about this movie is that I feel as though a lot of studios and even Marvel themselves have sort of learnt the wrong lessons about how to make this movie. You've heard reports again about like the concept art being overpaid and underworked, and filming have to be within a certain time period because it worked for Iron Man, so surely it must work again with all these other movies. Just churn out all these movies as quick as possible, as many as we can. We'll make a bunch of money. It doesn't matter about like whether you've got a script complete. It doesn't matter if you've got concept designs complete or anything like that. It'll work because it's worked once already. I kind of wish Marvel at the moment would just like take their time with things, make things more unique. But overall, I feel as though this movie is obviously iconic. It is one of the best. I think it holds up very well in terms of the visual effects and the special effects. The acting is phenomenal. And yeah, it's a good movie. You should go watch it. One thing that I'm always interested in is watching trailers after watching the movie themselves, and also after a significant period of time, because I'd like to know whether the movie was just given away straight up from the trailers, or if the trailers are just generally bad in today's standards. So I'm going to do that real quick. So the trailer gives away pretty much the entire first act, him making all of the suits, and gives away the villain. That's interesting. I hope trailers have improved after watching the next few movies. Okay, so I think that's about it. Again, I have no idea what I'm doing. I hope this is enjoyable enough. I hope people have normal discussions about this, because this is why I wanted to do it. I don't have any education or qualifications in film studies or how things work exactly. I just like having discussions. I just wanted to have a talk about like what I liked, what I didn't like, what worked, what didn't work, and hopefully that was achieved. Sort of. I'm not going to be the typical reviewer that just gives out a number, score, or a ranking, because that would just open a can of worms of movie reviews I do in the future, where it's like, oh, but you liked this movie more than this movie, even though you gave this movie a higher score than this one. Piss off with that. I'm not doing that. It's just, if you want to know my opinions, watch the video. If you didn't watch the video, you don't know my opinion. If you liked what you watched, then give it a like, give it a dislike. If you didn't like it, give me constructive feedback if I could do things better for next time. Subscribe, ding the notification bell, do all that sort of jazz. I'm going to be like streaming on twitch.tv/Rizikins, where I'm playing more games. I'm going to be trying playing games with my friend Jam, Razzie, other people like that. And hopefully you can enjoy that. I'll be watching other movies. I'll be trying to think about doing this more. But yeah, I'm waffling. Alright, anyway, take care. Bye.